about portraits. And portrait is a word for a picture of a person or even an animal. You can have animal portraits. And a self-portrait is a picture of a person that was painted by that person, created by themselves. This one is not a self-portrait. This one is just a portrait called the Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci back in 1506. And this is very kind of typical for a realistic portrait back in his times. Leonardo da Vinci was one of the most famous artists to come up with painting very realistically. So being able to paint her face to look real with all the correct shadows and proportions, and for the landscape to be far behind her, so there's some depth in this painting. And so this makes it one of the very famous portraits of all time is the Mona Lisa. And here is another painting done just 90 years later in 1591 by a man named Giuseppe Arcimboldo. And this one, he was really, really well loved by the royal families who hired him to paint them because he could paint very realistically, but he liked to have fun and he would do costume design and all kinds of stuff. But here you can see that he created a portrait of a person using fruit, vegetables, and flowers. And the royal families really, really loved this about him, how he had so much fun. So this is quite different from 90 years ago when the Mona Lisa was painted, because you can still tell it's a person, but it's very fun. So you can see if we zoom in on him, he's got sweet peas for eyebrows and olives for eyeballs and a pear as a nose. And you could just keep going through naming all the fruits and vegetables. But he is very playful, and he did a whole series of these. He also made portraits of people out of books, where they would have a book as a head, a hat, and the spine as the nose, all kinds of fun ways. So look him up. So he had a lot of fun. So your self-portrait doesn't have to be, super realistic. You are what you eat, right? This one is called Vertumnus. And so when you're doing a portrait, you can be as creative as you like. So we're going to keep looking at more types of portraits. All right, this one is a true self-portrait. You'll recognize this. This is a self-portrait by Vincent Van Gogh. This was done in 1889, so 300 years after the Mona Lisa, more like 400 years almost. And Vincent Van Gogh is a famous Dutch painter, and he's known for stepping away from being super realistic in his painting and in his technique, and doing these very expressive lines that you can see, all these waves and things. And he liked to play with color, cool colors against warm colors. And this one, so not every portrait is of someone smiling. Vincent Van Gogh, as you know, had suffered from some depression, and so he did a lot of self-portraits, and he is never smiling. This is often how he looks. And you can see right near his eyes is kind of, you're drawn to his eyes because those are the most realistic part. And the further away from the eyes you get, the more impressionist it gets with the way he uses his strokes. So think about the texture and the movement when you're going to design your self-portrait. This is a true self-portrait. Here is another self-portrait. This one is by Pablo Picasso in 1907. So about 20-30 years after Vincent Van Gogh. And this Pablo Picasso lived in Spain. And he is one of the creators of the Cubist movement, where instead of trying to draw people more realistically or fruit more realistically, like you saw in the previous pictures, he would draw and paint with a lot of sharp edges and angles and geometric shapes. So geometric shapes are the shapes that have names in them. So like, straight lines is kind of a rectangle, kind of a triangle shape, triangle forehead. So it's not super realistic. He would often, when he did self-portraits, make his eyes really, really big because he felt like that was the intensity of the stare, and you could see what the emotions were based on the eyes. So this is Pablo Picasso. And our next one is another self-portrait, and this one is by M.C. Escher in 1935, just 30 years after Pablo Picasso. And this one, M.C. Escher is known for liking to play with shape. And so this one, he's actually playing with a sphere and how it contorts the picture. So his hand is realistic, looking like a real hand. And then everything that he sees himself is all kind of warped because he's looking at a sphere. He's also really well known for the repeated patterns, which you may have seen. And so this is another portrait of himself where you can actually see him right there. And also a different take, so you can decide, how you want the audience to view you and what's around you. And another portrait here you might recognize is self-portrait with a thorn necklace and hummingbird. And this one is by Frida Kahlo in 1940, so it's 5 years after the M.C. Escher one was painted. And this one, I think you guys know, Frida Kahlo grew up in Mexico, and as a teenager she was in a really bad bus accident, and so she was hurt really badly and spent a lot of months in a hospital trying to recover. And while she was in there, she couldn't do anything except lay on her back because she had so many injuries that she wasn't really supposed to move, and she couldn't do anything. She was really bored, and there wasn't TV and internet and that kind of stuff. So she taught herself how to paint because she was laying in bed all the time. And so she taught herself how to paint, and she would paint mostly self-portraits. Actually, the majority of her work is self-portraits. And because she had lifelong pain from the accident, she often shows that in her work. And so this one, that's why you'll see like thorns in her neck from just physical pain and emotional pain. But also she's imagining herself somewhere else. So she's not in a hospital room in this picture. She's imagined herself kind of in a jungle scene. You can see the animals around her. And in Mexico, the hummingbird is a symbol of good luck. The butterfly is a symbol of kind of rebirth. Something new will happen. And so, but we see that she's sad, but she's hopeful. She has those little symbols of hope. So think about if you want to add any type of symbol in a self-portrait that you are going to create. And our next one, this one is a very playful, fun one. This one is called Triple Self-Portrait by an American artist, Norman Rockwell, back in 1960, so 20 years after the Frida Kahlo painting we just looked at. And so Norman Rockwell was very well known for these very personable, fun, very Americana paintings. And he painted for a magazine for years and years and years. But this one, you can see, it's called a triple portrait because there he is looking at himself in the mirror. Here's the back of his head, and here's the portrait he's actually painting. And here's even more portraits of like sketches he's done of himself. So, so many different portraits happening in here. So it's a triple portrait. You'll notice he also has very famous paintings here. This looks like maybe that's Vincent Van Gogh. This is Rembrandt, also a self-portrait. So he's referencing these great old artists. So that one is a fun one if you want to add some playfulness and a little more complicated to yours. So this one is not a self-portrait. It is a portrait. And this woman is Liza Minnelli, who's a singer, and she's actually the daughter of the actress who played Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. And so that's her daughter, who is now a singer and who's now, I believe, in her 70s. But this portrait was painted by Al Hirschfeld in 1999. And Al Hirschfeld is known for doing very simple line drawings and cartoony drawings, and often very funny. And so this one is kind of a caricature of Liza Minnelli because she's known for kind of this hand expression with her hands out and her big red lips singing. And so it's very, very simple. So you can even do a portrait that is very, very simplified. And it's very expressive. The movement in there is very expressive. And he's a fun one to look at. If you like caricatures, that's Hirschfeld. All right, now here's an interesting one. This one is done in 2013, and it's called Self-Portrait 1 by Nikos Geftakis. And his style is really fascinating. He has very expressive movement, both in the way that this is oil pastel, so in the way that he draws it, so you can see it's just all swirling, and so it's almost like water is what this is made out of, or yarn or something. And the facial expression is just so bizarre. He is smushing his face and seeing all the weird blobs of flesh that poke out as he's smushing his face. And so this might look funny. It might look like, is he hiding? What is he doing? It's interesting. So I want you to think about, in your self-portrait, all the different types of facial expressions. And he is really zoomed in close into his face. You can't see where he is or what he's doing. And you can see really closely how his movement, similar, I guess, kind of to Vincent Van Gogh, who used a lot of movement. This is a different way of using movement for this one. Very cool. All right, this next one you're going to enjoy. You might recognize this. This is The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. He's the voice in Moana of the demigod. And this one was made in 2015, so just 5 years ago, by a man named Juan Perednik. And actually, Dwayne Johnson posted a photograph of himself saying this was his cheat day, where he was going to eat just a huge stack of pancakes. And so this artist did a portrait of him to look very extra silly and to show, he's so strong. He destroyed his silverware just by holding them, and making his face look extra just silly. This is a caricature where you exaggerate features. So made his muscles super big and bulgy, and kind of making fun in a very fun way. And The Rock, this man, posted it to his Instagram because he loved it so much. He said this was just the greatest caricature of himself he'd ever seen, so he posted it. And it's great, and I thought you guys might enjoy that one. So you can even, have a lot of different ways of being funny through art, and this is caricature is one. Okay, here's another interesting one. This one is photography, and I have two by this artist. Her name is Flora Borsi, and she's very, very young. She created this one in 2016, and she has a whole series, and it's called Animide, where she has herself with an animal, and they're sharing their eyes. And if you want to check her out, she's really interesting. She has one with her and a dove and a snake and butterflies. She has all kinds of ones. So this one is including an animal into her self-portrait, and where she's kind of taking on the characteristics of that cat. So if you know, she's wearing cat ears. She has this makeup eyeliner that's often called a cat eye. And then, a little black nose right there, kind of what you would do for Halloween. So she's really turned herself a little bit into a cat. So she's merging herself with an animal here. So that's something interesting you might think about as well if you have a favorite pet. And the next one by her, so you've probably seen this one before if you've had me in art. And she has created a self-portrait here that is so very confusing. She does an excellent job at blending. She's really good at photoshopping and making the skin look continuous. Like you can't even tell where one photo stops and the next photo begins. So if you look, how many eyes does she have? So she has like 1, 2, 3, and one over there that you can see. And count her noses. So she has one nose. And this one, is this her nose or is that an eyebrow? It's very confusing. So she does this. She has a few photographs like this where she has just expertly blended her face to her own face, so many ways. So you see her in all these different views and possibly different emotions. So your artwork doesn't have to be perfectly realistic by any stretch. It can be cartoony, it can be fun, it can be serious, it can be realistic. And then this last one I thought you guys would enjoy. If you remember Vincent Van Gogh, where he's very serious, this was a take on if Vincent Van Gogh was doing his artwork now. So this one is by Dylan Vermeulen. I'm not sure what year. I couldn't find out what year it was from. But this was while he was in art school, and he created this painting of Vincent Van Gogh taking a selfie. So I thought you would enjoy that.